This program is a work of fiction. The station, broadcast, and events you are about to hear are not real. This audio is created for narrative and entertainment purposes only.
This is AM 1120 residual broadcast. If you're hearing this transmission, emergency conditions are ongoing.
This is WRB AM 112. Ooh, the time is 2:14 AM, August the 9th. Current conditions along the eastern seaboard: clear skies, winds south-southwest at 4 knots, barometric pressure 30.12, and holding water temperature at the Narrows 68 degrees Fahrenheit. My name is Verrick Holm. I am the overnight marine weather coordinator for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I've held this position for 19 years. My job is to watch water, to read tide charts, to make sure the numbers match the predictions. At 1:47 AM tonight, the tide gauge at Battery Park registered a reading I have never seen. Let me be clear, I don't mean an unusual reading, I mean a reading that should not exist. The tide gauge at Battery Park measures water level relative to a fixed datum and known 0 point. At 1:47 AM, the gauge read negative 4.7 feet below mean lower low water. That is, I want to say this carefully, that is below the lowest point the tide has ever reached in recorded history at that location, by more than 3 feet, and it's still dropping. I'm watching it now. The digital readout on my second monitor refreshes every 6 seconds. Every 6 seconds the number decreases, not by much, fractions of an inch, but it does not stop. I walked outside 12 minutes ago. My office sits on the 4th floor of the Marine Terminal building at Port Newark. I can see the Kill Van Kull from the west-facing window. The channel markers the red and green lights on the buoys. I can see 3 of them that I have never been able to see before. They're sitting higher than they should. The waterline on the nearest pier piling is wrong. I can see the barnacle stripe. I can see the dark band where the water should be covering, and it's exposed. At 2 AM on a night with no storm, no wind event, no seismic alert. I've called the National Ocean Service hotline, no answer. I've called the Coast Guard Sector New York watch desk. They picked up. They said they were aware of, and I'm quoting, anomalous tide readings across multiple stations, and that an advisory would follow. That was 20 minutes ago. No advisory has come. I want to document what I'm observing, just clearly, just what my eyes tell me. 1. The Kill Van Kull channel is visibly narrower. I don't mean the channel itself has moved. The water surface, the actual visible surface of the water, has pulled inward from both shores. I can see wet mud that hasn't been exposed since I've worked here. Maybe ever. 2. The Bayonne Bridge lights, the ones that run along the underside of the arch, they're reflecting differently. The gap between the bridge deck and the water surface appears larger. I've looked at this bridge every night for nearly 2 decades. The proportions are wrong now. 3. There's a smell, low tide smell, sulfur and brine and something organic like disturbed sediment, but it's stronger than any low tide I've experienced. It's coming through the ventilation system. My colleague Raoul, who works the loading dock below, called up at 2:03 to ask if there was a sewage event. There wasn't. 4. I can hear the pilings, the wooden pilings on the older wharves. When they're exposed, they make a sound, a creaking, a settling. Wood that's been submerged for years, suddenly holding weight differently. It sounds like an old house in winter. Groaning, intermittent. It's audible from the 4th floor with the window cracked. 5. The Staten Island ferry terminal. I can see it from here, just barely across the water. The gangway slope is wrong. The ramp that connects the terminal building to the ferry slip. It adjusts hydraulically based on water level. Right now it's pitched at an angle I've only seen during the most extreme spring low tides, and those happen in daylight, predictably, on a schedule. None of this is on a schedule. I'm going to contact WRB directly. Pansy Ashert runs the overnight. If this is happening across the harbour, she'll have heard from other stations by now. If it's just us, if it's localised to the Kill Van Kull and the Upper Bay, then maybe there's an explanation. A blockage, a geological shift, something structural. But the Coast Guard said multiple stations. The time is 2:22 a.m. The tide gauge now reads negative 5.1 feet. It was negative 4.7 at 1:47. That's nearly half a foot of drop in 35 minutes. And I need someone to tell me where it's going. I reached Pansy Achert at WRB at 2:29 a.m. She picked up on the first ring. She already knew. She said, and I'm going to try to be precise here. She said, Verrick, I've got Sandy Hook, Atlantic City and Cape May, all reporting the same thing. The whole coast is pulling back. I asked her how far back. She said, we don't know yet. Nobody's given me a ceiling. Everybody's just saying it's still going. I asked if there was a tsunami warning. She said no. NOAA hadn't issued anything. The seismic networks were quiet. No earthquake, no volcanic event, no bolide impact, nothing in the Pacific, nothing in the Atlantic. She asked me what my gauge was reading. I told her negative 5.3. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Verrick, Cape May is at negative 6.2. I need to put that in context. The tidal range at Cape May is normally about 5.5 feet total, top to bottom, high tide to low tide. A reading of negative 6.2 means the water has gone below the lowest possible predicted tide by more than the entire normal range. Pansy asked if I could stay on the air. She wanted to patch my feed into the WRB broadcast, a live marine conditions update. I said yes. I said I'd keep my window open and my monitors up, and I'd report what I could see and measure. So this is that. You're hearing me now through WRB AM 112. Oh, if you're in the tri-state area and you can see any body of water connected to the ocean, a bay, a harbour, a river mouth, a tidal creek, I'd ask you to look. Look now, tell me if the water is where it should be. I'm going to keep reporting as long as the instruments function and as long as I can see. The time is 2:34 a.m. Tide gauge negative 5.6 feet. Wind still south-southwest at 4 knots. Barometric pressure 30.12, unchanged. Temperature 71 degrees in this office. Everything else is normal. Every other system reads exactly as it should. The weather is fine, the atmosphere is stable, well, the earth isn't shaking. The only thing wrong in the entire observable environment is the most fundamental thing. The water is leaving. I just walked back from the window. It's 2:41 a.m. I want to describe what the Kill Van Kull looks like right now. The channel is, I'd estimate, 15 to 20% more narrow than it was an hour ago, and by narrow I mean the water has retreated from the edges. The mudflats on both sides are widening. I can see things I shouldn't. Old tyres, shopping carts, the skeleton of what might be a bicycle. Objects that have been underwater for years, probably decades, now sitting exposed in grey-brown mud under the dock lights. The barnacle line on the nearest piling is now about 4 feet above the water line. 4 feet of growth that is meant to be submerged. It looks like a white-grey stripe, dense, crusted. Below it the piling is bare wood, pale, waterlogged. It's the colour of something that hasn't seen air in a long time. It looks wrong. It looks like bone. There are 2 container ships anchored in the channel. The Maersk vessel, I can read its draft marks now, and the hull numbers that indicate how deep the ship sits. They go in ascending order from the waterline down. I can currently see the number 9 on the port bow. Normally you'd see the 4 or 5 at this time of night. 9 meters of hull that should be below water is now above it. The ship is making sounds, metal sounds, the hull adjusting to the changed buoyancy, I think, or the anchor chain pulling at a different angle. It's a low, intermittent groaning, like a wail almost. It carries across the water. Raoul called again. He says 2 of the loading cranes have triggered tilt alarms. The ground underneath the dock is settling unevenly as the water drops. He asked me what's happening. I said, I don't know yet. That's the truth. I don't know. The tide doesn't do this. The tide goes out and comes back. That's the entire point. That is quite literally one of the most reliable cycles on Earth. I'm watching the gauge. Negative 5.9 feet, 2:41 a.m., August 9th. And the tide is not coming back. Pansy patched me into a three-way with a harbour pilot named Gunderson out of Ambrose Channel at 2:58 a.m. Gunderson was on his way back to base after guiding a tanker in. He said, and his voice was flat, procedural, the voice of a man who's spent 30 years on the water, he said, "The channel buoys are sitting like they're on stilts. I can see bottom in places that are supposed to be 40 feet deep, up all the way down, but I can see shapes, I can see the sand." I asked him how fast it was going. He said he didn't know. He said his depth sounder was dropping steadily. "Like someone pulled a plug," he said. Then he paused. Then he said, "That's not what happened. I know that's not what happened, but that's what it looks like." Pansy broke in. She said she had reports now from, and she listed them: Montauk, Block Island, Providence, New Bedford, Boston Harbor, Portland, and Halifax. All of them reporting recession, all of them confirming sustained and ongoing water loss with no seismic trigger. Halifax, that's Canada. That's not the same tidal basin. That's not the same anything. At 3:04 a.m. she read a wire that had come in from the Associated Press. I'll quote it as best I remember. "The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has issued an informational statement regarding anomalous tidal conditions observed along the Atlantic coast of the United States and Canada. The cause of these conditions is under investigation. There is no tsunami warning in effect. Coastal residents are advised to move away from shorelines as a precaution." An informational statement. Not a warning. An informational statement. Gunderson laughed. Just once. Then he said, "The water under my keel right now is about 11 feet. It should be 43. I'm heading in." Pansy asked me what my gauge read. I looked. Negative 7.1. She asked if I thought it would stop. I said I didn't have any reason to think it would stop. I said I didn't have any framework for what would make it stop. She said, "I'm going to open the phones." So WRB went live, full open broadcast. Pansy's voice, calm and professional as always, telling listeners we were monitoring an ongoing marine event and inviting reports from anyone near coastal waters. The first call came in at 3:09 a.m. A woman in Rockaway Beach. She was whispering, and I didn't understand why until she explained that her neighbors were all out on the beach, dozens of them, standing on exposed sand that an hour ago had been under 6 feet of water, standing out there in the dark with their phone flashlights, looking at where the water used to be. She said, "It looks like the beach goes on forever now. I can't see the water anymore. I can see the lights from a ship way out, but I can't see the waterline." I wrote that down. 3:09 a.m. Rockaway Beach. Waterline not visible from shore. Between 3:15 and 3:40 a.m. I ran through every scenario I know. I've been doing this work for 19 years. I hold a degree in marine science from Stony Brook. I've studied tidal mechanics, coastal geology, ocean circulation. Let me tell you what this is not. It's not a tsunami drawback. Tsunami recession is rapid and localized. It happens in minutes and precedes a wave. We're now approaching 2 hours with no wave. And the geographic scope is wrong. A tsunami drawback doesn't happen simultaneously from New York to Halifax. It's not a storm surge reversal. There's no storm. There hasn't been a storm in 4 days. It's not a tectonic event. The seismic networks are quiet. USGS has confirmed. No earthquakes above 2.0 anywhere in the Atlantic Basin in the past 72 hours. It's not a gravitational anomaly. Even if, and I want to stress, this is speculative, even if the moon's gravitational influence somehow intensified, it would create a tidal bulge elsewhere, not a uniform recession along an entire coastline. And the moon is currently in its expected position. I checked. It's not a current disruption. The Gulf Stream does not have the capacity to drain the continental shelf. I'm telling you what, it's not, because I want to be clear. I have no explanation for what it is. Pansy brought on Dr. Marcus Whelan from NOAA's Center for Operational Oceanographic Products at 3:22 a.m. He lasted about 4 minutes. He said they were analyzing the data and that the recession rate appeared to be approximately linear. When Pansy asked him what that meant in practical terms, he said, "It means it's not accelerating, it's going at a steady pace." She asked how fast. He said approximately 1 foot of vertical drop every 12 to 14 minutes. Then she asked, "Dr. Whelan, how long can that continue before there's a serious impact on navigation and infrastructure?" And he said, "We're already past that point." Then his line went dead. Not hang up dead, dead dead. The kind of silence that means the connection was cut from the other end. Pansy moved on. She's good at that. At 3:38 a.m., the Bayonne Bridge Authority called my office directly. They said the clearance under the bridge had increased by approximately 9 feet. They wanted to know if any deep draft vessels were still in the channel that might attempt passage. I said, no. I said the ships in the channel were grounding themselves at their anchor points as the water dropped. I said that out loud. The ships are grounding. There are 2 container vessels and 1 tanker in the Kill Van Kull. The tanker has a draft of 41 feet. The channel depth is normally 45 feet at this point. By my calculation, the tanker touched bottom around 3:20 a.m. I can hear it now, on a low rhythmic metallic sound. The hull resting on sediment that was never supposed to hold it. 1,200 feet of steel, gently settling onto mud that hasn't been dry in 10,000 years. The sound it makes is almost peaceful, a slow, tonal hum, like a bell rung so softly you can barely hear it. 3:38 a.m. Gauge reading negative 9.3 feet. The water is still going. By 4 a.m., WRB had received over 200 calls. Pansy was managing the board alone. Her producer Danny had gone to get coffee at midnight and hadn't returned. She couldn't reach him by phone. She didn't say she was worried about that, but she mentioned it. I'll relay some of what came through between 4 o'clock and 4:30, the ones I wrote down. A fisherman out of Sheepshead Bay said his boat was now sitting in mud. His slip was dry. He said the pilings around his marina looked like telephone poles in a field. He said there were fish flopping in puddles on the exposed bottom. He could hear them from his car in the parking lot. A woman in Jersey City said she could see the foundation of a pier that had collapsed during Hurricane Sandy in 2012, the pier that was underwater. She said it was just sitting there, the concrete supports visible, seaweed draped over them like cloth. A man in Staten Island said his dog wouldn't stop barking at the water. The dog was facing the harbour and barking with a regularity he described as mechanical, every 8 seconds. He said it had been doing it for over an hour. An elderly woman in Coney Island said she'd walked down to the beach and the sand extended. She estimated a quarter-mile past where the waterline normally sits. She said there were objects on the sand. She said she saw a wheelchair. She said she saw a car. She said she didn't go any further. Pansy asked her, "Can you see the water from where you're standing?" The woman said, "I think so. Way out there is like a dark line, but it keeps getting further." A tugboat captain near Governor's Island said the Statue of Liberty's base was fully exposed. He said the rocks around Liberty Island, the riprap, the breakwater stones extended far below where he'd ever seen them. He said it looked like the island had grown. Like it got taller overnight, he said, like someone lifted it up. Nobody corrected him. He wasn't wrong, the island hadn't risen, but the effect was the same. At 4:17 a.m., Pansy read an updated statement from NOAA. This one was longer. It acknowledged that the recession was occurring along the entire North American Atlantic coast from Labrador to Miami. It confirmed that the rate was approximately 1 foot of vertical drop every 12 minutes, and that it showed no sign of reversal. It urged all persons to remain away from exposed seabed, and noted that formerly submerged structures, debris, and biological material may pose hazards. It did not offer an explanation. It did not say when it would stop. Gunderson called back in at 4:24. He'd made it to shore. He said the Ambrose Channel was unrecognizable. He said, "I've been piloting ships here for 31 years, and I'm looking at terrain I've never seen. It's a valley. It's a river valley with walls of sand on both sides. The water's still in the middle, but it's getting narrower." He paused. Then he said, "The ocean is retreating. That's what this is. That's the only honest thing to call it." 4:24 a.m., negative 11.2 feet. I hadn't slept. I wasn't going to sleep. Around 4:45 a.m., the eastern sky began to lighten. I didn't want it to. I know that sounds irrational, but in the dark, this felt contained, like something you could measure on instruments and report by phone, like data, like a systems failure with a pending fix. Light was going to make it real. At 4:52 I walked to the window again. The Kill Van Kull. I need you to understand what I'm about to say. The Kill Van Kull is a tidal strait. It connects Newark Bay to New York Harbor. It is normally 30 to 45 feet deep and about 1,000 feet wide. I could see the bottom. Not the bottom everywhere, but near the edges, near the shore. I could see the channel bed, dark sediment, rocks, cables, undersea cables, I think, or pipes. Things that are meant to be permanently buried underwater. They were visible, glistening in the first grey light. The tanker I mentioned earlier, the one that had grounded, was now listing slightly to port. Maybe 3 degrees. It looked wrong. A 1,000-foot vessel should not tilt. It should float level because that's what water does. It holds things level. But the water wasn't holding anymore. The 2 container ships had settled completely. They sat in the mud like models on a shelf. Their propellers were partially exposed. I'd never seen the propeller of a container ship out of water in a harbour setting. It was enormous, bronze-coloured, streaked with marine growth. It looked ancient, like an artefact. At 5:01 a.m., Pansy asked me to estimate the visible recession distance from my vantage point. I said, and I was guessing maybe 200 feet of newly exposed shore on either side of the remaining channel. She asked what the channel looked like now. I said it looked like a river, maybe 300 feet across, still moving, still flowing, but shrinking. At 5:04 my phone rang, not the office line, my personal phone. The number was my daughter's, Clara. We haven't spoken in 8 months. Since the divorce, since she decided I'd handled it poorly and she wasn't wrong. I answered. She said, "Dad, are you seeing this?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What's happening?" I said I didn't know. She said, "The beach is gone. The beach in Long Branch. It goes out so far now I can't. Dad, it goes to the horizon." I didn't say anything for a moment. She said, "Are you on the radio? I heard you might be on the radio." I said, "Yes." I said I was reporting for WRB. She said, "Okay, good. Keep doing that." Then she said, "I'm sorry I haven't called." I said, "It's okay." She said, "I don't think this is going to stop." I said, "I don't think so either." She said, "Okay." And then she hung up. 5:04 a.m. Negative 12.8 feet. My daughter called me because the ocean is disappearing. I don't know how to process that. I don't know how to file that information. I'm going to keep reporting. By 5:30 a.m. on August 9th, full daylight had arrived, and any remaining ambiguity vanished. I'll describe what I could see from my 4th floor window at the marine terminal. The Kill Van Kull was no longer a navigable waterway. The central channel still contained water, a dark, oily-looking stream, maybe 150 feet wide, flowing east toward the harbour. On either side of it, the exposed seabed extended outward. I could see it clearly now. It was grey-brown mud, strewn with debris. Tyres, cable spools, wooden fragments, bottles, what appeared to be a shipping container half buried in silt. The mud was glistening. Things moved on it. Crabs, I think. Small shapes scrambling across the exposed terrain. The smell was very bad now. Anaerobic sediment, the deep mud that's been sealed underwater for years, for decades, releasing hydrogen sulfide as it met the air for the first time. My office had a sulphurous haze to it, despite the ventilation being on full. At 5:37 a.m. I received an official directive from the Port Authority Operations Centre. All port operations suspended indefinitely. All personnel to shelter in place until further notice. All vessels to remain at current positions as if they had a choice. I counted 11 ships visible from my window, all of them grounded, all of them sitting in mud at angles that range from barely perceptible to alarmingly steep. One bulk carrier near the Bayonne shore had listed enough that I could see the flat bottom of its hull. Red anti-fouling paint. It looked like a beached whale. At 5:42, Pansy came back on the air after a brief station break. Her voice was the same as always, measured, clear, professional. But she said something that stayed with me. She said, "For those of you just tuning in, I want to be straightforward. The ocean along the North American Atlantic coast has been receding for approximately 4 hours. It has not stopped. We do not know why. We do not know when or if it will stop. This is not a test. This is not a drill. This is WRB AM 112. And we are staying on the air." The phones were still coming in. I could hear them in the background of her feed, constant ringing. She was taking one every few minutes now. The rest went unanswered. At 5:48, I logged onto the NOAACOOPS tide prediction website. The real-time data page was loading intermittently. Server strain, I assumed, but I managed to pull the graph for the Battery Park station. What I saw was the only word I have is impossible. The predicted tide curve was a gentle sine wave. The actual measured tide was a straight diagonal line going down, just down, no curve, no inflection, no minimum point, just a line descending at a constant rate, projected forward at the current rate of approximately 1 foot every 12 minutes. The water level would reach -20 feet by 7 a.m., -30 feet by 9 a.m. The average depth of the continental shelf off New York is about 150 feet. At the current rate, the continental shelf would be dry by early afternoon. I wrote that down on a notepad. I underlined it. Then I turned the notepad face down because I didn't want to look at it. 5:48 a.m. -14.1 feet. At 6:15 a.m. Pansy brought on Dr. Halbert Traskus. I'd heard him on WRB before during the solar event last year. During the clock anomalies in April, he's a physicist, formerly with the Naval Research Laboratory, now independent. His voice is distinctive, low, deliberate, with a precision that some people find calming and others find unnerving. He said the following. I'm paraphrasing from my notes, but it's close. What we are observing is not consistent with any known oceanographic, gravitational, or seismic mechanism. The recession is uniform along more than 3,000 miles of coastline. It's occurring at a constant rate. The water is not being displaced laterally, meaning it's not piling up somewhere else that we can detect. Satellite altimetry data, which measures ocean surface height globally, confirms that the Atlantic basin is losing volume at a rate that corresponds to the coastal recession. Pansy asked, "Where is the water going?" Traskus was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "That is the question that I don't have an answer to. The water is not evaporating. Humidity levels are normal. It's not freezing. Temperatures are stable. It's not being absorbed into the Earth's crust. At any rate we can measure. The volume is simply decreasing. The mass is leaving the system." Pansy asked, "Leaving to where?" He said, I don't know. I'll be honest with your listeners. I don't know. I've spoken with 6 colleagues in the past 2 hours. None of them know the conservation of mass is considered a fundamental law. It is not supposed to be violable, and yet what we are measuring appears to violate it. He paused again. Then he said, I want to be careful here. I am not saying the laws of physics have changed. I am saying that what we are observing does not fit within them as we currently understand them. That may mean our understanding is incomplete. That is historically the more common explanation. Pansy asked if he had any prediction for when it might stop. He said, no, I have no basis for predicting that it will stop. The rate has been constant for over 4 hours. There is no indication of deceleration. If it continues at this rate, he paused. If it continues at this rate, the Atlantic Ocean will be functionally empty in approximately 14 days. He said that last part very quietly. Pansy thanked him. She moved on. I sat with that number. 14 days, the Atlantic Ocean empty. I tried to imagine it and I couldn't. I tried to imagine what that would look like from space and my mind just refused. It wouldn't form the picture. I looked out my window instead. The Kill Van Kull. What remained of it was now a muddy creek running through a canyon of exposed sediment. The walls of the channel were maybe 20 feet high on either side. You could see layers in the mud, strata, dark bands and light bands, the geological record of a waterway exposed like a cross-section. 6:15 a.m., negative 16.2 feet. Somewhere out there, past the Narrows, past Sandy Hook, past the continental shelf, the ocean floor was revealing itself for the first time since it was formed. And it was still going. I need to tell you about something I found. This was around 6:40 a.m. while I was going through my desk looking for a charger for my phone. In the bottom drawer, under some old manuals, there was a spiral notebook. Green cover. It belonged to my ex-wife, Lena. She must have left it here years ago. She used to visit the office sometimes, before everything. She'd bring coffee and sit in the extra chair and read while I worked the overnight. This was maybe 2019, 2020, before it ended. I opened it because I don't know why. Because I was tired, because I missed her. Because the world was doing something impossible and I wanted something human. It was a nature journal. She used to keep them. Observations about birds, tides, weather, little sketches. The dates ranged from March to July 2019. One entry stopped me. June 14th, 2019. She'd written, walked the shore at Sandy Hook this morning. Low tide, but the water seemed lower than the chart said it should be. Asked V, that's me, and he said the gauges can drift. But I measured with the stick at our spot and it was almost 2 feet below the June prediction. Weird. The hermit crabs were confused too. They were all way down the beach in the wet sand like they were chasing it. I read that 3 times. 2 feet below prediction. June 2019. 7 years ago. I never checked. She told me and I said the gauges drift. I said it was instrument error. I dismissed it because she wasn't a scientist and I was tired. And it was easier to say the gauge was wrong than to look. I kept reading. July 3rd, 2019. Same thing again. Lower than it should be. V says I'm measuring wrong. July 19th. I stopped mentioning it, but I went back with the stick. And it was 3 feet below today. The waterline at our spot is definitely moving back, slowly, but it's moving. She noticed. 7 years ago she noticed. And I told her she was measuring wrong. I closed the notebook. I put it in my coat pocket, then I picked up the phone and called her. She lives in Vermont now, landlocked. She picked up on the second ring. I said, Lena, your notebook, the green one, the tide measurements. She was quiet. I said, you were right. She said, I know. Then she said, I've been watching the news. Is this what I was seeing? I said, I think so. I think it was already happening, slowly, for years. And tonight it accelerated or crossed some threshold. She said, or tonight we just finally noticed because it got too fast to ignore. I sat with that. She said, Verrick, how bad is it? I said, a physicist on the radio just said 14 days. She didn't ask 14 days until what? She understood. She said, "Are you safe?" I said, "I'm inland enough for now." She said, "Keep talking on the radio. People need that." I said, "Okay." She said, "I kept measuring every time I visited the coast. For 3 years, I have a whole notebook of measurements. It was always lower than it should be, every single time." I said I was sorry I didn't listen. She said it wouldn't have mattered. I don't know if that's true, but she said it kindly. 6:40 a.m., negative 17.9 feet. By 7 a.m., the scope had expanded beyond anything the Atlantic coast could contain. Pansy relayed reports as they came in. I'll list what I remember from the hour between 7 and 8. The English Channel was receding from both the French and British coasts simultaneously. Dover reported visible chalk at the base of the cliffs that had never been exposed in living memory. The Mediterranean was pulling back from shorelines across southern Europe and North Africa. The port of Marseille was effectively dry, ships grounded across Barcelona, Genoa, Algiers. The Pacific coast of the United States reported onset approximately 90 minutes after the Atlantic. San Francisco Bay was draining, the Golden Gate currents had reversed, as water rushed outward from the bay toward the receding ocean. Japan, Australia, the Cape of Good Hope, the Persian Gulf, every ocean on Earth was losing water at approximately the same rate. This was not localized. This was not Atlantic. This was global. At 7:23 a.m., I logged what I believed was a confirmed rate across all reporting basins, approximately 1 vertical foot every 12 to 13 minutes, adjusted for local bathymetry. Universal, constant, unvarying, the ocean, all of it, everywhere. The entire hydrosphere was draining into nothing, into nowhere that could be identified. Pansy's voice cracked once during the 7:30 update, just once, on the word everywhere. She said, "Reports confirm this is occurring everywhere." And on that last word, something in her voice bent. Then she recovered. She moved to the next item. At 7:45, I watched a tugboat in the Kill Van Kull finally tip over completely. It had been listing for an hour. The remaining water in the central channel had narrowed to maybe 60 feet, a brown stream cutting through a vast, stinking plain of exposed muck. The tug's keel had been resting on a ridge of submerged rock, and when the last support of water on its starboard side drained away, it went over, slowly, almost gracefully. The sound it made, a long, groaning crash, followed by a splash that was too small for a vessel that size. At 8 a.m., the tide gauge at Battery Park read negative 24.3 feet. This exceeded the depth of several subway tunnels that pass under the East River. I thought about that. Then I stopped thinking about that. A text came in from Raoul downstairs. He said, "The loading dock floor is cracking. The ground is settling. I can hear it underneath." I texted back, "Get to higher ground." He said, "Where?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. Higher ground from what? The water wasn't coming toward us. It was going away. The danger wasn't flooding. The danger was what? Structural failure? The ground itself reorganizing without the weight and pressure of the water that had been holding it stable? Or the danger was something else, something I couldn't name yet but could feel forming in the back of my mind like a shape in fog. The ocean has been on this planet for 4 billion years. Every system, every geology, every ecology, it's all built around the assumption that the ocean is there, that it stays, that it's permanent. What happens when a permanent thing leaves? I don't mean to the fish. I don't mean to the shipping industry. I mean to everything. 8 a.m., negative 24.3 feet. The sun was up, the sky was clear, and the world was emptying. By midday on August 9th, WRB had become something other than a radio station. It had become I don't know the right word, a witness, a place where people came to say what they were seeing, what they were feeling, what they didn't understand. Pansy kept the lines open. She kept her voice steady. She took call after call. I want to tell you about some of them. A girl called at 10:14 a.m. She said her name was Mackenzie and she was 11. She said she was in Cape Cod with her grandparents and she'd walked down to the beach and the ocean wasn't there anymore. She said, "It's just flat, like a parking lot but brown, and I can see ships really far away and they're not moving." She said, "My grandpa says it's going to come back, but he keeps looking at his phone and I don't think he believes it."
Pansy asked her if she was scared. Mackenzie said, "Kind of, but also it's kind of cool, like seeing something no one's ever seen." Then she said, quieter, "But I want it to come back." At 11:07 a.m., a man named Earl called from a payphone in Galveston, Texas. His voice was rough.
A smoker's voice, a working man's voice. He said, "I'm a shrimper, been shrimping 38 years. My boat's sitting in dry dirt right now. 3 miles from where the water used to end, it's all dry. I drove out on the seafloor this morning in my truck. I drove on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico."
Pansy asked him what it looked like. He said, "Like the moon. Like driving on the moon. Grey, flat, some hills. Fish everywhere, dead. The smell is... you can't imagine the smell." He said, "I drove until I got scared and turned around. It took me 20 minutes to get back to where the shore used to be." At 12:33 p.m., a woman called who said she was 84 years old. Her name was Marguerite. She was in Portland, Maine. She said, "I've lived by the ocean my entire life, 84 years. I watched it every day. I knew its moods." She paused. "And now it's leaving, like it's done with us." Pansy didn't respond immediately. Marguerite said, "I'm not afraid. I've lived long enough, but I feel grief. That's what this is. I'm grieving the ocean. I never thought I'd have to do that." At 1:15 p.m., a teenager called from Miami Beach. He was crying. He said, "My mom is out there. She walked out onto the sea floor this morning and she hasn't come back. She said she wanted to see it. She said she wanted to see how far it went. That was 4 hours ago. Her phone goes straight to voicemail." Pansy said, "Emergency services are aware that people are on the exposed seabed. They're working to reach them." The boy said, "But it's still going down. What if she walked out and the ground keeps... what if it gets deeper and she can't climb back up?" Pansy said, "Stay where you are. Stay on the shore." 12:33 p.m. The gauge was unreadable. It had exceeded its measurement range hours ago. By early afternoon, the infrastructure failures had begun cascading. I'll list what I learned between noon and 3 p.m. in no particular order. Coastal power plants that used seawater for cooling, there are dozens along the eastern seaboard alone, had begun emergency shutdowns as their intake pipes drew air instead of water. Rolling blackouts began in New Jersey at 11:40 a.m. By 1 p.m., Connecticut and Long Island were affected. Desalination plants in the Middle East ceased operation entirely. Gulf states declared emergency water rationing by local noon, which was 5 a.m. our time. Every major port on Earth was non-functional. Global shipping had stopped completely. This alone, I learned later, represented a disruption of approximately 90% of international trade by volume. Coastal wells drawing from aquifers that interfaced with seawater began reporting pressure drops. Saltwater intrusion reversed. Fresh water was being pulled toward the receding ocean in some locations. Municipal water systems in low-lying coastal areas began failing. Bridges over tidal waterways, I could see the Bayonne Bridge from my window, were experiencing structural stress as the ground beneath their footings destabilized. The Holland Tunnel had been closed as a precaution. The Lincoln Tunnel followed. Subway service in Manhattan was suspended entirely due to, and this was the official language, unknown subsurface settling. The internet was becoming unreliable. Undersea cables that had been laid on the ocean floor were now exposed to air, to shifting sediment, to the new stresses of a seabed without water. Transatlantic data connections were dropping intermittently. I tried to process all of this systematically.
I tried to maintain the posture of someone reporting conditions, but the scale of it, every one of these failures, was individually catastrophic. Together they described the beginning of a systemic collapse that I didn't have a mental model for. At 2:47 p.m. the power in my building flickered twice, then stabilized. The emergency generator kicked in. I heard it whirring. Below me, I looked out the window. The Kill Van Kull was gone, completely gone. Where there had been a waterway, there was now a canyon. A mud-walled canyon, maybe 60 feet deep, I was estimating from the visible strata, from the height of the ship hulls that now sat on the bottom like monuments. The central stream had vanished. The last of the water had drained through some time around noon while I was listening to calls. From my fourth-floor window, I was now looking down into a valley that hadn't existed this morning, that hadn't existed in geological time, a valley that was being carved second by the withdrawal of something we'd always assumed was permanent. The ships at the bottom looked like ruins, ancient, impossible, as if they'd been there for centuries. I took a photograph with my phone. 2:47 p.m. The canyon where the Kill Van Kull used to be. I don't know why. Evidence, proof. Maybe so that if the water ever came back, someone would believe this happened. Somewhere around 4 p.m., the emotional quality of the calls changed. The morning callers had been confused, excited, even some of them, reporting a phenomenon, asking questions, expecting answers. The afternoon callers were grieving. I don't know how else to say it. The people calling WRB by late afternoon weren't asking what was happening anymore. They weren't asking when it would stop. They were calling to say goodbye to something. A woman in Savannah said, "My husband and I got married on that beach. Our kids learned to swim in that water. My mother's ashes are in that water." Her voice was even, steady, and now it's just gone, like it was never there. A man in Boston said, "I sailed. Every weekend for 20 years I sailed, and I'm standing here looking at the harbour, and it's dirt. It's a big empty hole with dirt at the bottom, and my boat is down there, tipped over, and I can't—" He stopped. "I can't believe I'm mourning a body of water, but I am." Pansy took call after call like this, dozens, hundreds. People who hadn't expected to feel what they were feeling. People discovering that the ocean had been part of their identity in ways they'd never articulated. That it had been a constant, not just environmentally, but psychologically, a permanent backdrop, a thing that was always there when you looked toward it. And now when you looked toward it, there was nothing. Absence. A horizon that kept getting further away. Around 5:30 p.m., Pansy said something on air that I haven't forgotten. She said, "I think what we're experiencing is a kind of grief that doesn't have a name yet. It's not the loss of a person, it's not the loss of a place, it's the loss of a certainty. The certainty that the world has edges and the water fills them. We grew up knowing that. It was one of the first things we knew, and now it's not true anymore." She paused, then she said, "This is WRB AM 112. Oh, we're still here. The signal is still going out. If you can hear us, you're not alone." I sat in my office chair and I felt I don't know what I felt. Not fear exactly, not anymore. The fear had been there at 2 a.m. Now it was something heavier, something more like the weight of watching something irreversible happen in real time and being unable to stop it or look away or pretend it's a dream. I thought about Lena's notebook, her careful measurements, her patient observations. She'd been right. For years she'd been right. The ocean had been leaving, slowly, incrementally, so gradually that no instrument flagged it, and no professional took it seriously, and now it was leaving all at once, as if it had been making up its mind for a long time and finally decided, "That's not scientific language, I know that. I'm a marine science professional and I'm anthropomorphizing the ocean. But at this point, what language do we have that fits?" 5:30 p.m. The canyon below my window was now so deep I couldn't see the bottom in the fading light. By 8 p.m. on August 9th, 18 hours after this began, full darkness had returned, and without the ocean the darkness was different. I noticed it immediately. The harbour wall, or what had been the harbour, produced no reflected light, no gentle movement of light on water. The buoy lights that used to blink on the surface were now deep in the canyon, some of them still blinking, powered by solar batteries illuminating nothing but mud walls. The air was different too, colder, drier. The ocean moderates coastal temperatures. I knew this academically. Now I felt it. The wind coming from the east, where the ocean had been carried no moisture. It was a dry wind, a land wind. Except it was coming from where the sea should be. The smell had changed. The initial low-tide sulfur had faded as the sediment dried. Now there was something else, something mineral, like dust, like dry clay, like the inside of a cave. I hadn't eaten since the previous day. I found a granola bar in my desk. I ate it standing at the window, looking into the darkness where the Kill Van Kull used to be. Pansy was still broadcasting. She'd been on the air for, I counted, over 20 hours. Her voice was different now, lower, slower, but still clear, still present. She read a summary at 8:30 p.m. I'll relay the key points. The recession rate remained constant globally, 1 foot every 12 minutes. Since 1:47 a.m., approximately 90 vertical feet of water had been lost along the eastern seaboard. The continental shelf, which averages about 150 feet deep off the northeastern US, was now more than half exposed. At the current rate, the shelf would be fully dry by approximately 6 a.m. tomorrow. Beyond the shelf, the continental slope drops steeply to depths of several thousand feet. Once the water level passed the shelf edge, the exposed terrain would become steep, cliffs essentially. Underwater canyons miles deep revealed. I tried to imagine it, and again my mind refused. A cliff thousands of feet high, where yesterday there was ocean, visible from shore, a wall of rock and sediment that had never seen sunlight. At 9:15 p.m. I called Clara. She didn't answer. I left a message. I said, "I love you. I'm still at the office. I'm still on the radio. Call me when you can." At 9:47 p.m. I saw lights on the canyon floor. Far below, flashlights, headlights. People had driven down there, or walked, into the canyon that used to be the Kill Van Kull, into the canyon that was still getting deeper. I counted 7 lights, moving slowly, getting further apart as they went deeper. I watched them until I couldn't see them anymore. 9:47 p.m., August 9th. The lights going into the dark. This is WRB AM 112. Oh, the date is September 9th. The time is 3 a.m. My name is Verrick Holm. I am still at the Marine Terminal building at Port Newark, 4th floor. I have been here continuously for 31 days. The Port Authority sends supplies twice a week. I remain because someone needs to monitor the instruments, even though the instruments have long since exceeded their designed parameters. I remain because WRB asked me to remain. I remain because this signal still goes out and people still listen, and that feels like it matters. Here is the current situation. The Atlantic Ocean no longer exists as a body of water visible from the eastern coast of North America. The continental shelf was fully exposed by August 10th, the day after onset. The continental slope, a cliff face dropping from roughly 600 feet to over 12,000 feet, became visible from elevated coastal positions by August 12th. It is now September 9th, and the recession has continued at the same constant rate for 31 days. 31 days at 1 foot every 12 minutes is approximately 3,720 vertical feet. The abyssal plain, the deep ocean floor, began to appear on August 20th in shallower areas. From satellite imagery relayed through the few remaining functional communications links, the mid-Atlantic ridge is now exposed, a mountain range that no human has ever seen, With unaided eyes it is visible, above the waterline, which is now somewhere far below. I cannot see it from here. I can only see the cliff edge about 4 miles from what used to be the shoreline where the continental shelf drops away. Beyond that darkness, a vast, deep darkness that extends east toward Europe, there is still water, somewhere far below. We receive reports, intermittent, unreliable, that there are residual pools, lakes forming in the deepest trenches, the Mariana Trench, the Puerto Rico Trench, deep enough to still hold water at the bottom as the level continues to drop. But these are not oceans, they are puddles. Shrinking puddles in a basin that once held, I have the number written down, 332 million cubic miles of water. I don't know where the water went. Nobody does. Dr. Trasker stopped making public statements 2 weeks ago. His last recorded comment was, "We are watching a fundamental quantity leave the system. We cannot determine the mechanism or the destination. This is unprecedented, is inadequate. This is outside our capacity to frame." 3 a.m., September 9th. The signal continues. I want to describe what the world looks like now, from ground level, from here. If you stand at what used to be the shoreline, say, at the Battery in Lower Manhattan, and you look east, you see a plain. A vast, flat plain of dried grey sediment extending to the horizon. It is dotted with shapes, shipwrecks, not just recent ones, old ones, ships from centuries ago revealed, lying on their sides in silt that has dried and cracked like desert hardpan. Beyond the plain, maybe 4 miles out, there is the cliff, the shelf edge. You can see it as a dark line. Beyond it, nothing. A drop into haze. People walk on the seabed now. They drive on it. The dried sediment supports vehicles after about a week of exposure. Supply routes have been established across areas that were ocean a month ago. Emergency convoys cross what used to be the Long Island Sound, now a flat, dusty valley connecting communities that can no longer rely on coastal infrastructure. The exposed sea floor is covered in things, objects, not just debris, and wrecks. Things that have been down there for the estimates range from decades to centuries to, in some cases, longer. I've seen photographs, structures that don't match any known shipwreck, objects that don't match any catalogue. I don't want to speculate about those. I'm a marine weather coordinator. I report what I can observe and measure. But I'll say this, the sea floor is not empty. It is not featureless. It is a landscape that has been hidden underwater for as long as humans have existed, and we are seeing it for the first time. And some of what we're seeing does not make easy sense. There are also the bodies. I'll mention that only once. The ocean received our dead for thousands of years. It received ships full of people. It received a great deal, and now it is returning those things to air, to visibility. Recovery teams are working. They've been working since the second week. It is grim, necessary work, and I won't say more about it. The ecology is, there is no word. The fisheries are gone. Marine mammals that survived are on exposed seabed, unable to return to water. The rescue efforts are enormous and insufficient. Whole species, or I think the word is concluding, just concluding. I report these things because someone should, because the signal still goes out, because Pansy is still on the air every night, and I am still here, and the instruments still record even when they can no longer measure. I spoke with Clara 2 days ago. She drove down from Long Branch. She brought supplies, food, batteries, a new jacket, because the temperature here has dropped significantly without the ocean's thermal regulation. September feels like November. She sat in the extra chair in my office, Lena's chair, and we looked out the window together at the canyon. The Kill Van Kull canyon is now almost 200 feet deep. You can see geological layers in the walls, distinct bands of sediment, thousands of years compressed into visible strata. Clara said, Do you think it'll ever come back? I said, I don't have any data suggesting it will. She said, that's not what I asked. I said, no, I don't think it will. She was quiet for a while, then she said, Mum's measurements, the notebook. You said she was measuring for 3 years. What was the total loss in those 3 years? I'd calculated it. Approximately 8 inches over 3 years. And now it's losing a foot every 12 minutes. Yes. So it accelerated enormously, exponentially. She looked at the canyon. What if it was always going to do this? What if the slow part was just the beginning, like water circling a drain? Slow at first, then faster. I didn't answer because the analogy frightened me more than anything I'd heard in 31 days. A drain implies a destination. A drain implies something on the other end, something below. I held Lena's notebook in my pocket and I thought about her walking the beach at Sandy Hook in 2019 with a measuring stick, patiently recording something no one else noticed, and I thought about how the most important observations are often the quietest ones. The sunset that night was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Without the ocean to reflect it, the light just stopped at the cliff edge, a line of gold and then darkness, the most absolute darkness, the deep ocean basin absorbing all remaining light. Clara left at 8 p.m. She hugged me at the door. She said, "Keep talking, Dad." I said I would. I went back to the microphone. I went back to the instruments. I went back to the window. 3 a.m. September 9th. Day 31. The rate has not changed. 1 foot every 12 minutes. It has not accelerated further, and it has not slowed. It simply continues. This is WRB AM 1120. The time is 3:47 a.m. September 9th. I'm going to say something now to whoever is listening, wherever you are, however you're receiving this. I don't know what's happening. I've reported on it for 31 days, and I am no closer to understanding it than I was at 1:47 a.m. on August 9th, when the gauge first showed me a number that shouldn't exist. I know the ocean is leaving. I know the rate is constant. I know it's global. I know no one can explain it and no one can stop it. I know the world is reorganizing around this new fact, a fact that should be impossible but is now simply true. I think about Lena's notebook. I think about how she noticed years before anyone else. I think about how sometimes the most disturbing thing isn't the catastrophe itself. It's learning that it started long before you realized that you were living inside it already, that the world you thought was stable was already in motion. I don't know where the water is going. I don't know if the process has a limit. I don't know if there's something at the bottom, some destination, some answer that will reveal itself when enough has drained away. Some nights I think about that and I feel a kind of dread that I can't describe. Not the dread of dying, the dread of understanding, the dread of eventually seeing what's been hidden under all that water for 4 billion years, because something was hidden. The seafloor isn't empty.
The structures they're finding don't make sense. The objects don't fit our catalogues. And the deeper it goes, the stranger the reports become. I'm not going to speculate. That's not my job. My job is to watch the water and report the numbers. So here are tonight's numbers. Rate 1 foot per 12 minutes, unchanged. Estimated total depth lost since onset, 3,720 feet. Residual water, confirmed in the Mariana and Puerto Rico trenches only. Surface temperature at Port Newark, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees below seasonal average. Wind, east at 9 knots. Dry, sky, clear. This is WRB AM 1120. This is Verrick Holm. I'm still here. The instruments are still recording. The signal is still going out. If you can hear this, stay where you are. Write down what you see. Keep watching. The water is still going. We don't know where. We don't know why. But we're still here. End of broadcast.